As missile launches go, what North Korea did this week was called an embarrassment by some of the U.S. experts. While it's true that all 7 missiles eventually fell into the Sea of Japan, the launch did make the intended splash around the globe.
Good morning, and for those of you celebrating, happy Easter Sunday and also happy Passover from AM Joy. Now, you just saw a nightly news clip from 2006 from another time North Korea test-fired a missile, only to see it fail within a minute. 10 years later, North Korean history repeats itself. On Sunday, one day after North Korea put its military hardware on massive public display, and as U.S. officials braced for the first ever test of a missile that could reach U.S. shores, Pyongyang's attempt to fire a mid-range ballistic missile late Saturday fizzled 4 or 5 seconds into the test. The high-profile failure came hours before Vice President Mike Pence arrived south of the DMZ, and as a U.S. aircraft supercarrier approached the Korean peninsula in a show of force. For 20 years now, a defiant North Korea has been testing its missiles, firing them into the heart of frenzied diplomatic tensions as the world holds its collective breath. The only difference now is that there's a new and unpredictable commander-in-chief in the White House. And joining me now is Nayyera Haq, former State Department spokesperson, Sue Mi Terry, former CIA analyst on Korean issues, Sarah Kendzior, scholar of authoritarian states, Jack Rice, former CIA officer and terrorism expert, and Naveed Jamali, former FBI double agent and author of How to Catch a Russian Spy. Great panel. Thank you all for being here. And Sue Mi, I'll go to you first on this. Does the fact that North Korea's show of force missile test failed, is that a reason for for Americans to have less anxiety or to continue worrying?
Definitely continue worrying because this test failed. Now North Koreans have to do another test very soon to have a successful test. It will be a huge loss of face domestically, and for Kim Jong-un's own internal standing, he has to continue with more provocations.
And what is it that Kim Jong-un wants? What does he want from the world?
He wants to be accepted. He wants North Korea to be accepted internationally as a legitimate nuclear power. That's his final endgame. And to this effort, he's going to test probably at some point down the road an ICBM that could reach intercontinental ballistic missile that could reach mainland United States.
Wow, and Nayyera, is that ever going to happen? The rest of the world would accept North Korea as a legitimate nuclear power. Is that ever going to happen?
Certainly not with the kind of personality and the type of actions that you're seeing from North Korea right now. The United Nations has worked to sideline North Korea for several years, and that's really the body where people focus on what is the norm and standard of the country for the world. However, the UN is not the place to go when you want to enforce something, and that's going to be the challenge. But you have United States and the Western allied powers who are now going to have to figure out on their own, is the negotiating table enough? It hasn't been to this point. How far are we going to be going in order to stop this nuclear threat from North Korea? And ultimately, it's not just about stopping the nuclear threat of North Korea, it's helping South Korea, maintaining the democracies that we have in the region, which is South Korea and Taiwan at this point. Unfortunately, we have now a president that is seeing this as only a personality conflict between him and the North Korea president, leader of North Korea, both of whom seem to have some erratic decision-making processes and like to have shows of power. So that's certainly not going to help in our trying to manage and keep the situation calm.
Yeah, and let's listen to a member of the Trump administration. This is Mike Pence, Vice President, who's in South Korea. This is him earlier today.
This morning's provocation from the North is just the latest reminder of the risks each one of you face every day in the defense of the freedom of the people of South Korea and the defense of America in this part of the world.
And Jack Rice, this is a president who came in talking about America first and a very unilateralist stance. Suddenly, his vice president is out there talking about the defense of South Korea.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We've seen inconsistencies from this president from the beginning. I mean, that's the problem. What we know now is this, is that Donald Trump is a hammer, and he sees everything as a nail. And from his perspective, everything becomes personal. Unfortunately, what he did was he bought to the provocation. He bought to what Kim was trying to do. He actually ramped this up in a way he didn't need to do. He actually made this far more dangerous than that is necessary. And if what he could have done was focus more on the Chinese and driving the Chinese to move this issue because they're the ones who have the ability to do it, this would have gone a much different direction. This was was a massive mistake and potentially a very dangerous one.
And to that very point, you now have Katie McFarland, who is the person that was installed at the National Security Council by General Michael Flynn, who's no longer with the administration, but who has now been sort of turfed out. She's being sent off to an ambassadorship. But she was on Fox News this morning, and by the way, she was the only senior administration official who went with Donald Trump to his golf club this weekend in Palm Beach. But this was her on Fox News this morning.
North Korea is a liability to everybody, and it's a threat not just to the United States, not just to South Korea, not just to Japan, not just to Russia, but it's actually a threat to China as well. And at this point, we have to wait and see. You know, it's like your kids in the back of the car when you're on a long trip saying, when are we going to get there? Well, in this case, I think we should give the Chinese president some opportunities and some time, as well as pursuing the economic and diplomatic pressures that we have and our allies have that we can bring to bear on North Korea.
And Naveed Jamali, did that sound like a coherent response to North Korea to you?
No, and, you know, and look, as a 9/11 generation guy and someone who's learned the lessons of Iraq and seen what happened when we deposed Saddam, I think the rest of the world has learned a lesson about that action. North Korea is a rogue state. You know, when you start saying things like reunifying the peninsula, what that sends to North Korea is not we're going to keep Kim in power, we're going to keep North Korea around. It means basically extending South Korea up. That's not the rhetoric that they want to hear. It's the rhetoric that kind of freaks them out, and they respond, you know, by ratcheting things up. Look, North Korea has one move, and that move is to threaten. If they actually go into actual confrontation, it's game over for them. So they're going to go up as close as they can to that line. And when you think about what just happened, Joy, in North Korea, I mean, in a lot of ways, this was all started over a tweet. And thank goodness the North Koreans didn't decide not to detonate a nuclear test and instead did a failed missile launch. But that already shows that they were willing to back down. This has to be solved diplomatically. Nair mentioned the United Nations is not necessarily the place, and she's right. I mean, China has to be brought into it. But we have to understand that rogue states, you're not going to depose them easily. We've learned that lesson in Iraq. We should not go down that road. And I think that it is shocking to see an administration be so cavalier about this.
And Sarah Kendzior, you know, one of the things I think that is making Americans feel so rattled about this, and I don't think many people were thinking about North Korea on November 8th of last year when the election happened, but we're sure thinking about it now, is the sort of rhetoric about North Korea has really gone from 0 to, you know, DEFCON 1. And let's listen to the Director of Homeland Security. This is John Kelly, General John Kelly, on Meet the Press, which aired earlier today, talking about the North Korean threat to Americans, to the United States.
In the case of North Korea, you know, a kinetic threat against the United States right now I don't think is likely, but certainly a cyber threat. So we would raise various threat levels in the event that something happened.
Sarah, are we in a situation where we have both of these regimes, or the North Korean regime, but as well as the United States, sort of ratcheting up the threat, but they're not actually threatening to actually do anything? John Kelly's saying it's not a kinetic threat, meaning there's no threat of imminent war, but there definitely is the rhetorical ramping up of this threat level.
Yeah, and one of the key problems is that the rhetoric on North Korea from the U.S. side is very inconsistent. In March, Tillerson announced that diplomacy with North Korea had failed. They began bringing out this idea of a preemptive strike on North Korea. Trump started baiting North Korea with tweets. And of course, you know, North Korea is not going to see those tweets and say, you know, as some American commentators have, oh, this is a distraction, or Trump's trying to get out of some sort of domestic crisis or the Russian investigation. They're going to see that as an aggressive move. And similarly, Trump is so unsophisticated. He has no actual geopolitical strategy beyond just sort of a fetish for aggression, that he'll see things that North Korea has been doing for years, like testing these various military devices, as a direct provocation against the United States. And then he will ratchet up the rhetoric similarly and call, you know, for strikes on North Korea and whatnot. And this is very dangerous because these are two nuclear powers. And Trump has been obsessed with nuclear weapons since at least 1984, where he proclaimed he had learned everything he needs to know about them within an hour and a half. During the election, he said, if we have nukes, why not use them? Which is in direct contradiction to every nuclear policy we've ever had and that most countries have ever had. He's very erratic. He doesn't make decisions in a rational way. And so, you know, I unfortunately think that, you know, we should be very worried about where this is going in terms of confrontation between these two regimes.
And Sumi, I mean, is it accurate to say that the North Koreans take everything that Donald Trump says as a very serious threat, even if it's just a tweet?
Absolutely. North Korea is already a very paranoid state, and Kim Jong-un is a very paranoid man. He recently killed his brother using chemical weapon in a major international airport. So Kim Jong-un is likely to take this threat coming out of the United States right now very, very seriously.
Yeah, and Jack Rice, I mean, is there confidence in the intelligence community on the U.S. side that Donald Trump knows what to do in response?
No. That's the problem we're saying on the intelligence side, is that they don't know exactly what it is that we're doing. And if we listen to the panel as a whole, what we're finding here is the incredible inconsistencies coming from Tillerson, coming from Pence, coming from his national security advisors. And then what you have is all of a sudden him at 3 o'clock in the morning tweeting to the North Koreans. So when you have that happening, you contemplate the ramifications of this. My fear is that he's never contemplated the ramifications. He just knows how to pound his chest. The problem is brute force does not work by itself, and in this circumstance, it makes it far, far worse.
Yeah, well, I don't think we've lowered anybody's anxiety levels this morning, but I still want to thank Sumi Terry, Sarah Kendzior, Jack Rice, and Naveed Jamali Nayera will join us later in the show. And stay right there. Representative Barbara Lee has a plan to stop America's addiction to war. That's next.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.